is okay now to come on. Yeah, good start.
Okay. Okay. Welcome to tutorial 4, where we'll be looking at the teacher as a role model and a community builder.
Yeah.
I just want to get to my screen.
And to 2.
Okay, so I'm just getting this picture coming up now. Just in the meantime, thank you for all the contributions on your on the last assignments, where you all contributed your comments to that, and that will be marked in the next week. And thank you for putting it all in the place it was meant to be. So we're looking at tutorial 4, ethics in practice, the educator as a role model and community builder, which is quite an exciting part of the 4 units, the 4th unit, because you're there on the ground and you're actually involved, and to actually realize that you do have that role, that you really are a role model and a community builder, and we're going to look at that. The first part, we're just going to look at the assignments and going to give you some guidance on the assignments, and depending on how much discussion there is, how much time we have left, we'll look a bit more at Unit 4 as well. So let's start off looking at the assignments. Assignment 4, the partnership project proposal, ethics in practice, the educator's role model and community builder. So let's just go work through it carefully so that you really have good guidance and can do as good an assignment as possible. You can see it's worth 30% and it's due on the 1st of October. So you have to identify any urgent or real need among a school community. And I don't think that's going to be too hard in the South African context. If you remember the video clips we looked at in tutorial 3, there were so many needs, down to very basic needs of chairs and a classroom and a roof that doesn't leak, or to just have writing utensils and things like that. So there are those needs, but I'd like us through this tutorial to just think out the box a bit and identify a really broad range of needs, that you don't all just think of doing a food scheme or something like that. So identify a urgent real needs among a school community that you're in contact with, or with which you're able to establish contact. So this can't be theoretical, you can't invent this, you actually have to go and find a real school, and hopefully this will be something that you might even be able to realize or pass on as a project to your church or a community that you're involved with. Now, this need must involve aspects of moral development, where societal issues contribute to the challenge. And I don't want you to focus too much on doing something abstract or thinking only of an ethical thing, for example, dishonesty or things like that. Basically, could be just focused on any need, and it's more to explore just how there's an ethical aspect to all needs. If a child doesn't have food and they can't focus, that is an ethical thing. So it's not just things like cheating or sexual misconduct. It's really any need, and understanding why that is really an ethical problem. And then you must develop a thoroughly outlined proposal using a formal proposal approach and how this issue could be dealt with. And it should be a partnership project, not run by an individual. So let's go look at the rubric, and that'll give you a bit more guidance, and then we'll look at some specific aspects, further guidance. So you can see there's the 30 marks that it's worth, and the first 10 marks, effective use and understanding of course material and theory in order to provide a comprehensive and detailed analysis of the multiple systemic factors involved in the problem. Okay. And I'll explain what I mean by that now as we look through some of the aspects. And this analysis must include the way these factors impact future trajectories involving solutions or further breakdown. We'll come back to this question as we look at some of the past course material things we've done. That's 10 marks. 10 marks, a comprehensive and detailed strategy for improvement involving clear steps that are realistic and involve all relevant role players in an appropriate manner. I just think of the example of someone says, I want to lose weight. And they set a goal, I'm going to lose weight. But actually, that's not a goal. That's just a pipe dream. But if you say, I'm going to stop eating 2 extra donuts at lunch and I'm going to do 30 minutes of training every day, and in that way I'm going to lose 2 kilograms in 2 weeks, that's a clear goal. So that's what we're talking about. It can't be very abstract and just saying we want to improve the school situation. So it must be very comprehensive with detailed, concrete steps. And then 5 marks for an appropriate report format and clear flow, and 5 for grammar and style. So let's have a look at some of the course material and social scientific resources that could come into the assignments as you'd be doing it. For example, if we first just look at Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory of development, this would be a good example of something that you could refer to or use to get a comprehensive picture. And we're going to discuss this hopefully with the group chat now of some of the kind of ideas you could do and simplistic ways of trying to address it versus more comprehensive ways. So in the chat tonight with the discussion, we're actually going to, if you participate, you'll actually start putting together the framework of an assignment already. Another example would be if you looked at Erickson's 8 lifespan stages. So this would help you, for example, let's take the school that you're looking at, the school that you're going to choose to do a proposal with. It would be helpful to think, what is the age group that you're looking at? And then what are their psychological developmental needs? And that might help you to focus and work out a concrete proposal in that area. Or if we just take also simply the well-known Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that might help you also to look at that community that you're working with, the school that you're going to choose, and just try and think, where are they on this? And you might want to have a multiple approach, that you can't just say, I'm going to work on the self-esteem before we've done even the basic physical needs. So we're going to look at all of those aspects together. I'm going to show you now just a video clip, and I'd like to open up a discussion around needs that you would come up with based on this first clip. Okay, we're just going to open up the clip.
These 16-year-olds have just got their report cards, and they have passed nearly all of their subjects. Next year is their final year of high school. They have big dreams for the future.
I want to be a businesswoman so that we create job opportunities for South African citizens.
But they all failed maths. They failed because of poor resources in their schools.
You can't concentrate. Usually, like, you struggle a lot because you don't have those equipment. So, like, you just, just do whatever that you think it is okay for you.
Right now, many students don't do well in subjects like maths and science. Under the apartheid regime, white children were given better education. The ruling African National Congress is trying to transform the education system, but it's struggling.
There has been a lot of improvement in the education sector since 1994. A lot of schools have been built and many more children are getting an education. The concern, however, is the quality of that education.
A methodology study done by the World Economic Forum showed the quality of South Africa's education is among the worst in the world. Some, particularly in the rural areas, don't have classrooms, chairs, or desks. As a result, many children don't finish high school, making it difficult to find work.
It's a focus on the teacher. It's a focus on teacher education. It's a focus on ensuring that our teachers, especially those that teach science and mathematics, or especially those that teach science and technology, will improve their skills best, will improve their knowledge. So it's putting resources in areas that will have an almost immediate impact that will translate into the socio-economic development of this nation.
But until that happens, students grow increasingly frustrated. A good education means a decent job and possibly a ticket out of poverty. But if more isn't done to improve the quality of education in Africa's largest economy, South Africa may struggle to remain competitive globally and on the continent. Haru Matasa, Al Jazeera, Johannesburg.
Okay, so I'd like to invite you out there to consider the following question, and I'm just going to give you 2 minutes, and then you can respond. What were the needs that you saw identified out of that clip? What were the basic needs that you saw identified? And then which need do you think you could meet? And start to brainstorm some practical ways. Imagine there's a school that you could be in contact with that's represented in that video clip, and the needs that are represented there. And which need would you choose, and how would you start to look at that?
Rehoboth at the CLC, will you just unmute yourself if you're going to answer verbally? Otherwise, you can just write your answer down in the group chat. And the person watching from home, if you can just go into Q&A and just write a response down there for us. Thank you. Okay, sorry. Just go to group chat. Okay, this is Nicole Brunk.
Okay. I'll just read that. Okay, so there's a comment from someone, and it's Nicole Brink, and she said, are we allowed to look at the absence of social support in schools? For example, if learners are facing extreme challenges in their personal lives and they have no counselor or emotional support. And I would say definitely that would very strongly fall within a need. And that's the kind of thing that you get from Brofenbrenners. You don't just look at the classroom situation. You look at that child in all their multiple contexts. And often impacting the home or reaching out to the home is going to be the most effective way of helping them in the classroom. Conversely, trying to help them in the classroom when their home is in a negative situation and they can't study there, that would be very relevant. Okay, Nicole, you also mentioned there's a need for qualified teachers, definitely, and lack of resources, basic books, stationaries, tables, chairs, absolutely. And we can think, you can just think yourself how that would impact you. I know that in our situation, if I don't have the right pen, if my laptop's not in the right position, it's very frustrating. How much more when you don't have those basics? Rehoboth, thank you for your comments. Yeah, classrooms, resources like books and charts and things like that. What was the basic needs? Before I go into the next video clip, I'd like to just look at and identify what is the basic need in terms of subjects that are identified there. Can anyone consider that? What did that video clip look at mainly in terms of the subject needs? Okay, so feel free to respond. Okay, there's another comment from Nicole. There were poor facilities, there was poor lighting in the classrooms, overcrowded classrooms. Absolutely, there's a litany of needs, and you can just, it's all about the basic resources. An actual interesting thing would be to just stop and write down a list yourself as what would you need for education to take place. And it would be basically a building that's dry and safe, and the equipments, and you could just write down a list, and you'd probably come up with very easily, before you knew it, like 50 items that we maybe take for granted. If we come from a privileged school, we don't even think about it because a fish doesn't think about the water. And if you come from a free school and you have these resources, you don't think about it. But if you actually had to look around you, it's actually a good exercise. Go to the school that you're in, if you're in a well-off school, in a good environment, and actually just write up all the things that you have and take for granted. And that can help you compare that to other schools where they maybe don't have those. There's another, thank you, Nicole, you mentioned that there were poor maths and science schools. And that really came out with that World Economic Forum report, according to that. And I think we have to not overreact to that, because those kind of reports done outside the country can be a bit unfair and discouraging, because they may have their criteria, they may not see the positive things, etc. At the same time, we can't totally deny it. And in that report, we were ranked in science and maths right at the very end of about 140. We were somewhere in the 140 number. So that was a clear problem there. We're now going to look at that first clip was very clear, maths and science and those technology subjects and basic resources in the classroom, from the basic infrastructure of the building and the chairs and the desks, through to the actual equipment, through to teachers, and then the qualification in science. But I'm going to look at another video clip by Ken Robinson, and it's going to be interesting. Just look at this video clip and consider, in terms of needs, whether it is saying something different, and how that would, whether that is relevant in our context that we're looking at in our South African context with these great needs. Okay, I'm just going to get the video clip.
Okay. Put it down. Put it down.
Okay, so I've got the clip here, and this is Ken Robinson here.
Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad.
Sorry, I'm just getting this.
We don't want to focus politics on the notion of involves a rejection. Our principles around which the large majority of our politics is involved.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you think.
What people talk a lot about in education is the need to get back to basics. And they've been talking about this since the beginning of education, by the way. Normally what people mean when they talk about the basics is a group of subjects that they think are more important than all the others. And particularly in education, now people talk about the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math. So they think it's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. These are very important fundamental disciplines. They are necessary, but they're not sufficient for the type of education that we need. In any case, the basics of education are not any group of subjects or disciplines. The basics of education are the purposes for which we do this. But why are we invested anyway in systems of mass public education? What's it for? And if we don't agree on the purposes, then we have a problem in talking about the means and the processes. Well, I think there are four purposes to public education, and I will labour them, but I'll just point them out as a reference point. Not in any particular order. The first thing is economic. We all know that education has powerful economic purposes. It does, and it should. We should recognise it as a fact. We invest so much in it as communities because we expect education will contribute to our long-term economic health, vitality, and sustainability. That's how we got to have these systems in the first place. But the economic model of the day was industrialism, which is why the system looks the way it does. It is not that system anymore for us. We have a different set of imperatives now for our children and for ourselves if we're to make them economically independent, as I think we all want to do, don't we? Don't we want to make our children economically independent? We do. I can't tell you how much we want to make our children economically independent, and at once, if it's possible. But what sort of education do you need for that? There was a report published about 18 months ago by IBM in which they reviewed interviews they had with 1,800 leaders of companies in 80 countries, companies and organizations, and they asked them what their priorities are, what keeps them awake at night. And there were two words that came out in reverse order. There you are there. The first, they said, in reverse order, was adaptability. How do you run organizations which are able to respond quickly to change? Now, this is a bottom line issue for companies, because if you don't adapt quickly to changing circumstances, you're very likely to go under. And the history of corporate life around the world is populated with the corpses of once great corporations that didn't move quickly enough. Think, for example, about Kodak. Kodak is now in bankruptcy proceedings. Kodak was synonymous in the 20th century with photography. They invented home photography. They invented digital photography. And now they're out of business. And it's not because people stopped taking photographs. On the contrary, people are taking more photographs than ever, aren't they? Irritatingly more photographs than ever. I get it all the time. People posting on Facebook, here's my cappuccino. Check this out from a different angle this time. You know. And here it is, after I've drunk half of it. Fascinating. Send me more of these photographs. What happened was that Instagram came along and whipped the ground ready from beneath the feet of companies like Kodak. They just did not adapt. And the reason they didn't adapt is because organizations are not like machines, they're like
And
organisms.
that Iris
They
database
are
has been
living
updated.
entities made up of people with feelings, motivations, roles, aspirations, passions, and ambitions. And if the organism doesn't respond, just as in the natural world, if it doesn't respond to changes in its environment, it dies. And it's what's happened to many companies, including most recent Kodak. So adaptability. But the top priority these CEOs pointed to for their company's long-term flourishing was creativity. They said we need companies that are consistently and systematically creative. And how do you do that? You know, we need people who think differently, but we can't, this is the great irony, we can't always find them because kids coming out of universities and colleges these days find it very difficult to come up with fresh ideas. And why? They've been educated on the standard routine of routine testing, you know, multiple choice tests. We've been sort of systematically quashing the appetite for originality in our education systems. The irony is that a lot of these systems are in place now in what we would believe to be the interest of the economy, and corporations say they want something else. So if we're to meet the economic requirement of education, we need to have systems which promote creativity and adaptability as bottom line competencies, the very things that our education systems at the moment are being discouraged from doing. The second purpose of education is cultural.
Okay. So we can see there, that's a very interesting clip, and obviously you can find a lot of Ken Robinson stuff on education and alternative ways of looking. Also, if you're interested in looking at someone like Edward de Bono on education, there's a lot of interesting things out there. But the question I have is, this video clip, did it give you an alternative perspective compared to the last video clip on our greatest needs in education? And depending on what you say, we can discuss it a bit more. So I'll just give you a little moment to respond. In what way was this video contrasting possibly with that first video? Just have a think about that and please respond on chat.
The students at Katu, can you just respond through group chat, please? And the other, Nicole, if you respond through Q&A. Thank you. Nobody responding.
Okay, just going to give you another moment to think about that. Okay. Well, feel free to respond, and I'll pause if there is any response, and I'll respond to your responses. I think it's very interesting because Ken Robinson mentioned. Okay.
Unfortunately.
He mentioned how there's such a focus on what he called STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. And definitely not saying that's not important. But I think his videos are caution when we actually say, we take something like the World Economic Report and we say, okay, just equipping people with science and maths is our greatest need. And then when you look at the need of the school, you might be so tempted to be fully involved in that way. But he talked a lot about adaptability and creativity. And I think that's something that would be interesting to think about. Is that as much a need? When we put such a focus on science and maths in the schools, and you can imagine how that happens. It can happen where the budgets all goes towards where the high status teachers are all the science and maths teachers, and that becomes the bar that all the students have to pass to feel like they are valid students or that they have a hope in the future. But it's important to think how many jobs out there are directly related to that, and how many students are really truly capable of doing very well in that. And I think that's a different issue from them learning the basic science and maths and falling well below that bar. I think that becomes a non-negotiable. But once you've reached that level, it's possible that you can be just jumping on the bandwagon and over-focusing on that, when that may not be the critical things that are required for successful business life, as Ken Robinson was saying. So the question is, I have to put to you, if you have a moment to look at it. Okay, there's a comment here. Yes, the comment was from Nicole, thank you, that they removed the focus, and that Ken Robinson removed the focus on maths, technology, and science, and focused on promoting creativity and adaptability, which is needed in the 21st century. That's exactly right, as you were saying. And my question is, if you have, feel free to respond to it, and I'll respond to that, as in what way could you see that as an ethical issue or as a development issue, and in what way could you be involved in that? Let's say that you have a poor school in your area where people are struggling with basic needs. Is it possible that thinking of training them in creativity and adaptability is something that you wouldn't consider, because you'd be considering either we just have to focus on their maths and science, or we just have to focus on their basic resources, and creativity and adaptability programs fall by the wayside, or we might think, well, they're not really up to it, which is a bit of a paternalistic thing to suggest that they're not able to be trained in creativity and adaptability. And the challenge would be to think, how could you do that? How could you do that with children of any socioeconomic level? And how could you bring creativity to their experience and train them in that? I think that would be an interesting thing to look at in a project proposal if you'd like to. We're going to now move on to another part of the unit. Please feel free to keep commenting on this, and we'll go back to this. But now I want to actually look at Unit 4, the teacher as a role model and community builder, and discuss it a little bit. And we've got another video clip here, which we're going to show you.
If I do my job properly, this business isn't what I do in my private life. Well, there's something for you to discuss. Principle 8, which asks teachers to demonstrate honesty and integrity and uphold public trust, is the only one in that list which refers to the behaviours of a teacher outside of the context of their working life, their professional position. And some people will challenge that and say, what's it got to do with me? I'm keeping my private life separate from my professional life. Why should I be accountable for what happens in my private life? How can I uphold public trust?
My job, or you get
Getting confidence into the life
parents or my friends are parents and that is part of them, my sisters, you know, anything that we can about this. And I think it's the same way that like social media, I mean, I think that the opportunity and I put a lot to if you choose to be a profession, then you can't risk you can get drunk or spectrums or it's like the whole accountability thing. How can a parent trust you to look after their children if you don't think that you don't know stuff?
Once you get into discussion with students, you realise actually that's what they are thinking and talking about, because their reputations are involved. Their reputations as individual teachers, the reputation of their school, the reputation of the teaching profession is very much a part of what they're aware of. And that is also holding public trust. What do the public expect of you that's different from plumbers, car mechanics? What are they expecting of you that's different from other professionals?
You can't exactly stand there with a parent stood toe to toe having a barney because little Johnny isn't doing as well as they think they are. You're saying to the parent, I'm really sorry. And the parent suddenly starts becoming aggressive. You've got to still show diplomacy. You can't exactly swing a punch just because they have, because that's just not all. And you lose your job, you lose your professionalism, and you've lost your argument as well.
I think it is seeing somebody that's an upright citizen, a prime example of somebody within, within citizenship that's a role model to your child.
Well, say more about what a role model is.
Well, just the way that they behave and conduct themselves. It's all about modelling, really, that you would expect for your child.
I think you have to behave in a responsible way because you're respected by people in the community as well. And they seem to have like an idea of how you should behave. So, for example, if you're on a night out with friends and the blind drunk in the club, people will look at you and think, she's a teacher as well, and it's your job is defining who you are. They see you as a teacher. You're not just that girl that lives around the corner who likes to have fun with her friends. She's a teacher, and you're not supposed to behave in that way.
You're a citizen as well. As you said something very interesting, I thought, about your Katie first and a teacher second. Go on, say more about that.
But it's not because I don't want to be a teacher, because I really want to be a teacher. But it was just like, as a lot of us in here are, like straight out of school to college and straight here, we're only just turning 21, so we're still really young. A lot of us haven't got proper, settled lives yet, so it's important that we still have that. I don't want to miss out on having a life just because I'm a teacher. But I do want to be a teacher. I understand how important that is.
Yes.
But I do want to have that.
Yeah. That reflected perfectly, I thought, the dilemma that all teachers would have in merging their professional and their personal identities. Because none of these students, and none of the ones that I've met in recent years, have really contested the idea that becoming a teacher is actually not just about the competences and skills that they need to teach, but it's a role. Actually, it's being a role model.
Okay, so we're going to discuss that a little bit, but I just want to respond to Nicole again. And you said that's a difficult question. I feel the curriculum is so overloaded that promoting adaptability and creativity is restricted. And that's a very interesting comment. So what I get from that is, as a teacher or involved in a school, you already have a problem because you're struggling so much with the curriculum that there just doesn't seem to be any time for that. And then that problem would also extend if you're looking in terms of our assignment that we have to do assignment 4, of finding a school that you can be in partnership with and coming up with a proposal for them. There's going to be the same struggle. There's going to be that lack of space is going to be there for the creativity. And that's an interesting comment. Thank you, Nicole. The question I have out of this last video clip, what is your experience of that? Do you agree that the teacher is a unique kind of role model, unlike most other jobs? And if so, have you experienced that, and how do you feel about that? And what do you think about the dilemma that there's a conflict of interest in fulfilling that model and that role, and also having your own life? And have you experienced any conflicts of interest in that area? I'm just going to give you a moment to respond, if you'd like to respond to that before carrying on and commenting. I mean, I can just do respond. I mean, I can think of one place where we went on a camp, and there were a few of the teachers off on the side, and we had a drink because the owner of the camp invited us, and we had one beer, and there was really such a big fuss kicked up about that, and it was interesting. That was a clear example of such a conflict of interest. We weren't being disorderly. We weren't getting drunk at all. We just had a glass of wine with our meal, or some of us had a beer with our meal. And for some of the students, that was unacceptable. And they like SMS'd home to their parents and half the teachers were so offended, and the other half were actually saying, yes, actually they're right. And that showed the dilemma. So if you've experienced any other dilemmas as well, feel free to share that.
Starting from here. Okay. Children are not only.
Okay. So here's a comment from Reba. Children are not only in school, they are out in town also. And if they see you misbehave in town, you damage your own integrity and your reliability. And I think that's absolutely true. And depending on how long you've been a teacher, you've had this experience that your privacy as a teacher plummets. There's really that you just know that depending on the size of your school, especially, you've got such a chance of meeting your pupils outside of the school context, and that's a positive thing. But it's also it just accentuates this dilemma that you want to continue your normal private life, and yet you have this responsibility before people and students there. Okay, we're going to go back. I'm going to go back to the assignment now, and we're going to have a look at it. I'm going to have a look at the assignment in terms of these video clips and some of the discussion we've been having. And let's try and think a bit out the box with the assignment and have a look at that. Okay. So if you look, I'm just going to look at the assignment here. So the first thing is effective use and understanding of course material and theory for comprehensive detailed analysis of the multiple systemic factors involved in the problem. Just in plain English, you could see just the example. We looked at, there was Maslow, we looked at Bronfenbrenner, just that you don't just say, look at the problem of the child in the classroom. You've got to look at the child in the classroom and all the contexts of the school. So you have to consider the home environment, you have to consider the social context, you have to consider multiple factors. So that you in your reports, you show that you've understood this, because the problem with only looking at one factor, you might come up with a solution for that factor, but if you've ignored other contextual factors which might be the main problem or feeding into it, then your results are not going to work. For example, if a student's not doing well in the exams and their home environment, they being abused at home, you might say the solution is to give them extra lessons, and you invest a whole lot of time and energy in them getting extra lessons after school, but the real problem is what's happening in their home environments. Those extra lessons are not ultimately going to help the student. So that would be an example of looking at the home environment as well. And there's so many multiple factors that are involved. What is the ethos of the school, and what is the buy-in of the rest of the staff in terms of your goals. I've just got a comment that I want to put in there. Okay, and Nicole, you said definitely to that last question. People make comments like, "Oh, but you do this or that, and you want to teach kids. You're kind of expected to be like a child or a learner in a way, because you have to follow certain rules, etc. You shouldn't be seen drinking or partying." That's exactly right. That's what was expressed in the clip, and that's what I've experienced, and as you're saying, what you've experienced. And I think as teachers, you have to find your balance, because if you really totally give up your life, you're not going to be happy, you're not going to be an effective teacher, and it's not easy to find that balance. But I think you actually have to accept it goes with the territory, that is part of your responsibility, that you've chosen to be a teacher, and that is a calling with a great responsibility and a great reward with that. If we're looking at this then, you must consider the way these factors interact and how they impact future trajectories. So think of how, as with Bronfenbrenner's ecological theory, think of how the home environment interacts with the child, interacts with the school environments, how the teachers and the parents are interacting. And as you identify a problem, try and think of all the multiple causes that could be linked to that problem.
Being a child.
Okay, I'm just going to go back to another comment here.
Being a child.
Yes, being a child of God, we must not see it as a negative, but God told us to live for Him at all times. That's from Reba. Thank you for that. I think that's an excellent comment, and this course is based on a Christian ethos, and as we looked in Unit 1, that there's a special motivation as a Christian to teach and to serve in that way. And out of that Christian motivation is also willingness to sacrifice. The whole idea of giving up some of your personal rights for a greater good and for the good of others is a very Christian concept that we are familiar with. If we are mature Christians and are following the Bible. And that's really excellent comment, that instead of seeing it as a loss of your rights in that, you can see it as a positive thing that you are doing purposefully. No one's stealing it from you. You willingly lay it down for a greater good. If you have any more comments, do comment. I'll comment on that. Just the next point here is that it's a comprehensive and detailed strategy. So in the first 10 marks, it's looking at all the factors that are involved. And in the second 10 marks, it's your actual strategy for improvements and the clarity of the steps. And it's very important to consider all the relevant role players. That comes from the analysis in the first section. If you do a comprehensive analysis of all the contexts and role players, then your solution must affect all the role players. Let's take an example. If you go into a school and you don't respect the authority structure of that school, you haven't checked with the headmaster, you haven't checked with the head of the department, you haven't got the buy-in of all the people involved, and you try and launch an independent strategy, it's unlikely to succeed, because the people with the authority and the power and the people who are needed to make the thing sustainable and carry on in the long term are not going to be with you. And so that would be an example there. So an understanding of this must come out clearly in your report. And obviously the last two is just the appropriate report format and the grammar and style. So we've just got about 2 or 3 minutes left. And I really encourage you to really be committed to this unit and take the report seriously, because you can just put together a report and it's not really based on anything. Or you can really identify a real school and take a careful, prayerful, and thoughtful look at the needs that are there. And really think out the box. Try and consider all the possible needs. The basic physical needs, think of the educational needs, science and maths, but also I challenge some of you to try and think of those other needs like creativity and adaptability, and think whether that is really something that is lacking and whether you could do something in that area. And think, how could you do that? And a final word on this assignment, an important thing is also to think comprehensively, not just in terms of the people involved and the need. Obviously, you're thinking of the child, you're thinking of the teachers and the headmaster and that whole school teaching community. You're thinking of the community, the parents and them. You also have to think of the less tangible factors like the media and the environment and the atmosphere, the nation and in that community. Those are all things that have an impact. But in terms of providing the solution, I encourage you to think creatively as well. Don't just think of yourself providing the solution, but what role players could you bring in? Governmental or church or creative role players. Go and explore things like Artscape and those and what programs they have and how that could be linked in terms of creativity and adaptability. Or think of businesses who are calling for this creativity and adaptability. Do they have resources that you could tap into and bring into the solution? All right, I hope you enjoy this unit and the assignment, and go well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Go well.